Hey everyone, my name is Lily and I'm the book blogger behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm going to be bringing you my June wrap up. I am kind of all over the place this entire summer period, back and forth. I kind of warned a little bit about it in my wrap up for May, I think, and definitely in my wrap up for June, which I just finished writing on the blog. So if that's up by now, which I think it should be, I will leave the link in the description box below. But I want to just make a future apologies for the backgrounds of things. I'm so late on filming videos as well because it's really difficult to even find like a quiet background as I kind of been bopping around place and place. So this is it for now. Might change, just so you know. Anyway, in June I read 40 books. So after May, I was like, is it really possible to read more than 31 books? I think I read 31 books in May. And in my mind, I was like, no, definitely not possible. June, I already knew was going to be even more stressful than May. I say this every month, basically, where I'm like, two things. One, oh, I'm going to take it easy next month. And then the second one, this month was even more stressful than last month. That's how I feel about June. July so far is even more stressful. So, like, already those two things out of the window. But in June, I read 40 books. And I think part of the reason why is that I don't know if you've realized, but I have a bunch of panels. And in June, I had a lot of panels. Three or four. And in July, I also have, I'm counting it off of my head, four. So that's why I had to do a lot of extra reading, and I didn't really realize that. So I had to double up reading on places where I really couldn't or shouldn't actually. So because I like to send questions and stuff beforehand. So anyway, July is gonna be really rough. I'm mostly prepared for the July panels. I only have one where I need to do a few more books. But then I have August things coming up. Super exciting. I'll just do sneak peeks here. I have a Music Magic panel coming up. And then I have a Romeo and Juliet retelling panel coming up. And then I have to also start planning for the fall. So if there are any panel ideas or panel people you'd like me to work with, please leave them in the comments below. But anyway, that's like a short overview about why June got to 40. But of the 40 books, 50% on the dot were books written with POC main characters, and 45% of those were books written with queer main characters. My goal always is 50% POC, so double thumbs up. And my goal always is 33% for queer main characters. But for June, I was like, can I make it to 50? So close. I started reading a few books in June where definitely would have gotten me over to that limit, but I didn't end up finishing them. So beginning of July will be a very queer start. So I'm really happy actually with those statistics. And it's kind of like when you read a lot of books, I feel like it is higher chances that you will reach those statistics, but then also sometimes you don't reach them. So I like to diminish my accomplishments by being like, oh, I read so many books, so of course I'm going to get to those statistics. But no, they're conscious decisions on my part. So stop diminishing yourself, Lily. Of the favorite books, I'm looking at my notepad right now. I have 4 adult favorites and 6 YA favorites. So let's just jump into the adult favorites. Were they all queer? Almost all of them. Okay, the first one is The Final Strife. The Final Strife is kind of a chunky book. I didn't realize this when I was reading my electronic copy, like my e-arc of it. But when I've been seeing photos of it going out, I'm like, ooh, that is long. It doesn't feel that way. So in case you're kind of worried about that, I was talking to some people who hadn't read it, and I was like, hey, it doesn't feel that long. I promise you. But because they were a little bit worried about it, and I was right. So the book just keeps going, and especially by the 2/3 part, when things are really wrapping up, and kind of the action is really at its crescendo for that book, it does not feel long, and it does not feel not rushed, but it doesn't feel strenuous to read. I blew through The Final Strife. I was just so absorbed. I think I read it in I want to say 2 days, where I was planning to read it in multiple days, and I just ended up finishing it because I loved it so much. The world building is so fantastic, and the characters in it are just so complex and endearing. They managed to toe that line between some of their situations being like, are you kidding me? While also being like, oh, okay, I might have done that if I were in your shoes. There are some trigger warnings for substance abuse and a few other things, so definitely check out. My review has some trigger warnings, and there are also other trigger warnings that you can find other places. So actually, that just goes for like a general note for this book. There are pretty sure trigger warnings for most of these books. And so definitely check those out before you start reading if that is what you would like to do. So The Final Strife was just so fantastic. It's the beginning of a trilogy. I pre-ordered the Waterstones one, which I don't normally do because I haven't had actually any experience with Waterstones. So I'm really, really hoping that nothing goes wrong. But I saw those red sprayed edges and I was like, must have. So really excited for the trilogy and just in general so happy that this adult fantasy queer debut is just so beautiful. It just has a great balance, as I said, between characters, pacing, tension, action, adventure, all of those different things. The next one is The Book Eaters. Both of these, if you noticed, were in my adult fantasy debut panel. The Book Eaters is one of these books where, like, it makes you think so much. So basically, in it kind of like a dystopian society vibe, with the main character really having to struggle through patriarchy and sexism, like to a rage-inducing level, which I think also is very indicative of our society. I did an interview with the author of The Book Eaters, so definitely I will link that below because there's a lot of really interesting kind of behind the scenes inside information about it. But I think that The Book Eaters is such a unique world building concept, this idea of consuming books and then having that kind of put into our minds. And but also this idea that the books, just that metaphor alone, like the books that we read shaping our perspectives, was just like so spot on. You know, with those things where you're like, oh my God, that is just like so cool and so relevant. This socialization and the connection between the media and the things that we watch or the things that we read was just so fantastic, and seeing the main character have to struggle against that particularly. And also, I really loved what the author was saying as well. Is like this main character, she doesn't think of herself as a hero. So if you're thinking about this as like, oh, the typical hero arc, that's not what this book is about. This book is about complex decisions that have ethical consequences, where it's like that's what this book is about. This gray space between these ideas of like what you would do in an ideal world, and also like not the villains in the world, because I think villains is overly simplistic for these characters, but the other characters who you're like, no, I don't agree with, I guess. So The Book Eaters has to be one of my favorite books definitely for June. The next one is The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes. I think that's the title. I only wrote on Perfect Crime. This adult romance was just so cute. After The Queer Principles of Kit Webb, I read that one basically because book Twitter was like, you have to read this one. And I think I read it last year. But so I was excited for this series. And so The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes is the second one. And I do think that this one has like very heavy kind of Robin Hood-esque. But I think what solidified my love of this book so early on is that there's a lot of letters. One of my pet interests or pet obsessions is letters in books. And so what I love so much about it is at the very beginning, these two main characters are communicating via letters. And you can see so much of their personality and the vulnerability that we sometimes show to strangers, which we wouldn't show to our friends. And both of these kind of that tension between those two different things, between this banter, oh, I'm blackmailing you, but also like I'm confiding things in you that I probably wouldn't confide in other people. And this is my personality and my banter, like all of those in the beginning just solidified my love very early on for this book. And it only increased as I kept reading the book and as the characters started to evolve and develop in front of your eyes, and like they meet IRL basically. So this is one of my favorite adult romances. The next one is also an adult romance. It's an adult fantasy romance, and it's The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. This one, I did a recent Instagram review, which I will link below, because this one defies explanations. It's like You've Got Mail. So there are letters as well, which is like 2 for 2 letters, honestly, in my favorites. Or not 2 for 2, but 2 for 4. So half of my favorites are also just because I love letters. So it's like You've Got Mail meets Wild West vibe. So there's sheriffs and marshals and kind of this like, yeah, Wild West feel meets Undertakers. So one of the main characters is an Undertaker, one of the other main characters is a marshal, but also meets zombies / supernatural stuff. It's also Portal, so a little bit of Portal fantasy. All of these things are swirling around, and apart, all of the elements are really fabulous, but together they somehow just really work in the undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which I was not expecting because that is a lot to unpack. But I really loved the fantasy and romance blend in this. I loved seeing these characters open up to each other, but also seeing the world kind of open up in the background. There's also mystery, there's also family drama. Like, it manages to balance all of these very different elements together, but combine into such a fantastic kind of sweeping fantasy romance. So definitely check that out if you're a fan of the fantasy romance genre. The next one is also the only one that I have with me, and it's TJ Pawar Has Something to Prove. This one resonated so deeply with me. Like, on one hand, this book is very much about activism. It's very much about like internalized sexism. It's also about confronting sexism, specifically about body grooming and hair, like hair growth and hair presentation and beauty as an image. Like, on one hand, all of that theme is so beautifully and nuancedly is so beautifully and with nuance explored. But on the other hand, this also has debate. This also has questions about friendship and also love. Can we like learn to trust someone? Can we learn also to kind of silence the voices in our own head, or accept them, or talk to the voices in our own heads that are like keeping us back from other people and other meaningful connections like that? So this book has like both of those two kind of vibes, or both of those two elements so well described and so well balanced, where I just like loved this book so much. There are also, when I was reading it, some moments where I was thinking about like my life and my own personal decisions, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It just is one of those books that manages to be emotionally moving and thought-provoking, you know, on that aspect, but also really captivating and kind of like fun and entertaining, and also, yeah, a little bit more emotional as well on this side, not only that side. So that's why I love this one. The next one is This Place Is Still Beautiful. This one, I love sister stories, okay? And this one is like trump card sister stories. It's like two sisters who are very much having misunderstandings and miscommunications between them. It's also dual perspective, which is a brilliant decision. It targets racism. It targets kind of the two different sisters. I think they're both biracial, but one is more white passing than the other. So targets is kind of white passing privileges, or not targets. Why am I saying targets? No, it has conversations about white passing privilege and also about racism and about sisters and how we react to those. I felt like one of the sisters was one where I completely was like, this is the sister I would be if I was in this story and one of the main characters. But what I loved about This Place Is Still Beautiful was that even the other sister, where I was like, oh, this is not how I would act necessarily, you get so deep into their perspectives that I honestly couldn't pick one. Like, from the synopsis, I was like, oh, that sister is going to be my favorite. And then as I was reading it, I was kind of like, whoa, I kind of love you both. So that's how I felt about This Place Is Still Called Beautiful. It's a very emotional, nuanced story about activism and about racism and speaking up, but also about family and about love, like between family members as well, mother-daughter relationships and sibling relationships. The next one is Hollow Fires. I have loved every single book by Samira Ahmed. Like, each one I feel like I love more. I love Hollow Fires, made me cry. It's also one of those audiobooks, because I listened to it on audiobooks and I also had a physical copy, so I was able to balance between them. It's one of those books where you finish reading every day and you like have to tell someone. So for me, as I was reading this, I was like kept people updating people about how I was feeling and what was happening in this book. And it's like, oh my God, now this has happened. Now this has happened, but they don't know this. And like all of these different things. Hollow Fires manages to balance Also, racism, Islamophobia, and activism with these moving conversations about like privilege, about not calling out other people, about love, about friendship, about family. Like it is, I've now that I'm looking down at my book of favorites, there's a lot that have to do with activism. I feel like 4 out of the 6 YA ones, but that's just kind of the mood I'm in. I'm in a fiery, like I'm ready kind of mood right now. I'm ready to handle these conversations. I'm ready for stuff to change. That's the mood I'm in. So Hall of Fires was so fantastic. It's like dual perspective, and it follows these main characters who are working through both of those kind of worlds and those issues, and kind of how to live and exist and survive, and how survival is an act of resistance as well, but also when to speak up too. So both of those things. The next one is Home Field Advantage. This targets. This talks a lot about sexism and about homophobia. Home Field Advantage is probably my favorite Dahlia Adler book. Period. It just like totally swept me away in the fact that both of these main characters are so complex in the sense where like you can see things that they're doing and you're like, please no, like don't do that right now, and they do it and you're like, oh, okay, but I still love you kind of thing. They're tackling internalized homophobia. They're tackling internalized homophobia. They're also, one of the perspectives is tackling the sexism because she is a quarterback and everyone's like, oh, the quarterback's a guy. Oh, what? It's a girl. Everyone is very upset, but they're also like confronting the old quarterback died. But the old quarterback wasn't a very nice person. So they're dealing with that as well. And I just fell in love with these characters so deeply. I loved one of these characters basically from when I first started the book. But then I fell also in love with the other character. Also, I'm like blanking on everyone's names, by the way. Fell in love so deeply with the other character as well as the book went on that I also couldn't pick a favorite, honestly. Like, I think that when I can't pick a favorite character and it is dual perspective, that is a sign that I really love the book. The next one is Godslayers. This is a sequel to Gear Breakers. This was like an automatic, I love this book. I loved Gear Breakers so much. And so Godslayers, I wasn't really sure where the sequel was going to go, honestly, but it went in the perfect direction. There are a lot of, I can't really talk that much about what happens in the book, but there are a lot of like clever, masterful writing twists and foils, and like the way that their character arcs mirrored each other, and going through kind of like wondering about rebellion and wondering like what is the approach to rebellion, how do we resist. That's a huge question. Basically, if you it's not a good example, but the only one I can think of is basically if you really loved this idea, I feel like in the third Hunger Games, where they're talking a lot about the costs of rebellion, how do we rebel, what kind of messaging do we have, and kind of what will we, or how will we take a stand within a rebellion when things aren't necessarily going the way we want it to. Like, that was in Godslayers, and so that's why I really loved Godslayers, honestly. Also, the main characters are just like so precious, always. There are a few moments that are like heart-wrenching, definitely, but the main characters in this one is just so fantastic as well, that I just knew I loved that one. And the final one is a YA fantasy debut, and it's Violet Made of Thorns. This one, main character love. Like, immediately, I love her so much. Basically, she is ambitious, she's resourceful, she's kind of like, oh, I'm okay being the vilified one. And so she is like the epitome, I feel like, of a morally gray heroine, because a lot of people are like, oh, you're manipulative, or you're only in it for yourself. But like, she needs to survive, okay? I am like totally in her corner, basically, as a main character, and seeing the dilemmas and choices that she has to make. It is just so fabulous to see that and to watch her have to grapple with the consequences of those, and also the fact that some people are not going to understand why you've made that decision. Some people aren't going to agree with whatever decision you make. And it's like, I'm with you. I'm so with you. like first book, because I'm pretty sure it's Duology. This one just immediately, like I started reading it and I fell in love with her, and she just like carried me through the entire book. And also by the end, there are a lot of twists where I kind of felt like some of them were coming, as in the fact I knew twists were coming, but I didn't really expect these twists. So that's why I loved Violet Made of Thorns. And that brings me to the end of my June wrap up. And yeah, I don't really know what else I can say to you honestly about July, because it's gonna be rough. So expect to see me looking real haggard basically for my July wrap up, because I'm already predicting that will happen based on the fact that it's like the first week of July when I'm filming this, and it's already been a lot. It's been a lot. So anyway, I hope that you had a really great June. Please let me know what your favorite books are for June. And also I had like a bunch of other things that I'm really interested in knowing. I feel like what is your favorite book is kind of like a standard question though. What is the book that surprised you the most in June? So I hope you have a really great day, and I will see you in the next one.